Welcome back. This time I am with Matt Klink from Klink Campaigns. And our points of view about immigration are very, very different. But as I proposed in my first show, I want to find a common ground because I am completely convinced that any point or any middle point between MAGA and woke is not going to give any fruit. So I am trying to find common ground with I am trying trying to propose a rational center left. I am trying to find middle ground with a rational center right, and try to find, especially in this issue, immigration, the possibility of some ideas that could take root and gain enough visibility. So in 2029, we might have some hope of getting some rational immigration policy. So Matt, having made that introduction, let me see, what are your main, what are the concessions you would be considering that I am not at all on the side of abolish ICE? As I have said, I consider abolish ICE is the worst that could have happened to immigration. Let me see what concessions would you be willing to make in order to get to this common ground?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And I realize that this is a thorny or a difficult subject to talk about because I think you're in your introduction, you're right, that the left and the right, they run to their respective sides, which are here, and most people are somewhere in the middle. But look, I can tell you that both from, one, I am not a public policy expert. I think you and I had that discussion earlier.
Mhm.
I'm more of a political person, but I will tell you that you never start out offering concessions. And as I believe strongly, um, the Republicans right now have all the cards in their hands. They may not in 2029,
Mhm.
but you don't start making concessions when you're winning. I think that suffice it to say that what I would recommend for any Republican running for office is border security first, and until the border and the number of people coming into this country illegally, and I think that's critical here, is and slows to zero or near zero. And I will say, yesterday, the Customs and Border Patrol reported that zero migrants in May of 2025 were allowed into the country, whereas in 2024 of May of 2024, 62,000 plus came into the country illegally. I think that this needs to continue. And that, look, we've already tried the compromise that the Democrats wanted in the Immigration Reform and Control Act in the mid 1980s, where we did amnesty first, border security second. Guess what? We got the amnesty, we didn't get any border security. I think that the way to maybe come to some sort of a compromise is to get an accurate count on the number of people that are in this country illegally, because right now there are two numbers in this country that never change: the number of people who are here illegally and the number of green jobs created. So until we
Well,
get good information, I would not urge any Republican to make any compromise whatsoever.
well, but that's very easy. But on that, you would have to give the first step, because otherwise, all you are going to get right now is the abolishized left. The idea is to give visibility to ideas that are different from that, so you are not disappointed. So
But
you say
that's the
county.
problem, though.
Let me finish the idea.
Yes, sir.
So
Go ahead.
you say getting an accurate account of the people who are here illegally. Okay, you could get a pre-registration, but to get that pre-registration, you would have to propose something. And what you are proposing is enforcement first. Uh,
Absolutely.
and that's a non-starter. That's precisely the point.
Okay, well, let me flip the script. What
Mhm.
concessions are you willing to make from the left that's going to say to the right, okay, this guy is serious?
Okay, let's say something that has been proposed is the Kennedy-McCain bill. All the enforcement petitions made by the right, including mandatory verify. You could even make other concessions, like, for instance, creating a different kind of permanent status that has no right to vote. You may include, for instance, harsher penalties for immigrants who are here illegally and commit crimes. You could add conditions and approbation period, for instance, where the immigrant doesn't just get here because he's lucky enough to have the right sponsor, but because he commits in his he invests in his education, he actually learns English, he gets committed with American institutions. So you can get those kind of concessions that the abolitionist left is not going to give you, but a rational left could.
Well, the left will never be able to abolish ICE. So,
No,
um, so that's a pipe dream that the radical, well, unfortunately, you say the radical left, I say the mainstream of the Democratic Party. Look, those are really so those are minor. Those are minor concessions. I mean, to look, we should already, if you are an illegal immigrant and you commit felony against Americans or against, frankly, anybody in this country, you should not be here, period. And
mhm.
and look, we don't need anything more than we don't need to do anything different. All we need is for local localities like Los Angeles and states like California with sanctuary city and sanctuary state policies to actually begin enforcing the law. So
Eh,
that's look, the Republicans, I would urge you, do not compromise on anything related to amnesty. It is a pipe dream that will only lead to more of the magnet of drawing more people into this country illegally.
well,
It's never going to happen. And I'm
let me
sorry. I don't.
let me okay, let me clarify a couple of points there. Is one that when you have an immigrant, it matters, character matters, because that's the person who is going to live with other Americans, who is going to be their neighbors, who is going to vote in their elections. So it's not like importing a ton of lead. And we have a tradition that goes from Lincoln to Reagan to especially Kennedy, that whose basic idea was not reflected in the 1965 reform, which is that accidents of birth should not weigh in your chances to come to America. My question is how a person comes legally to America.
Well, we had this conversation yesterday,
Yes.
and
Mhm,
perhaps that's a place where we could start to initiate some reform,
mhm.
is to talk about how to make legal immigration more efficient. I still believe that the best system of legal immigration is that America allows people to immigrate based on what we need in this country. If we need farm workers, or if
Mhm.
we need nurses, or if we need doctors, or if we need computer scientists, I think that that's great. But the problem that a number
Uh,
of
just very briefly, that's not in contradiction with what I am saying, because
I agree with
character
you. No, and I agree with you. That's
and skills, because even if that person doesn't come with those skills, he could commit on acquiring them in 5 years.
correct. And I think that
Mhm,
that
mhm.
that's perhaps, rather than, we always say it's easier to swallow the elephants in small bites rather than big gulps. Or one big gulp. So I think that perhaps that's some place that we could start and find some common ground is reforming the legal immigration system,
Mhm.
and at the same time, really cracking down on the illegal immigration system. And
Let me make some historical note here. Do you know that Alexander Hamilton, in my opinion, the most important immigrant of this nation, would not have been able to come here legally with the current law? That's to make that's to I mentioned this because I consider that this is one of the reasons why the current immigration law, which you want to enforce as it is deeply immoral. So we don't have only the problem of the quantities, because if the current immigration system had been efficient, the number of visas issued would have been enough to not have millions of people working on the ground. The supply would have matched demand. But besides the issue of the quantity, we have the issue of the morality, of the values of this nation. And the current immigration law is not is found wanting on that on both ends. If that is so, should people who came here illegally just because they didn't have the right sponsor, should have a chance, one chance to make it right in the current system, in a possible reform, I mean?
how many people are we talking about?
In a pre-registration, you would know.
Well, again, Joe Biden let in 10 plus million people. Earlier numbers have said, I mean, I think we're talking at over 30 million people, which is almost one.
I don't believe. I believe those numbers are a bit delirant. The kind of numbers that come from Center of Immigration Studies or Robert Rector. But whatever the number, give them one chance. And if they don't meet the conditions in the probation period, goodbye.
Well, but I'm sorry, I just don't. Look, going back to Alexander Hamilton, I mean,
Mhm.
following that logic, then the only people who then legally have the right to be here would be the Native Americans. I mean,
No.
look, that was 200 and more than 250 years ago. The world is a dramatically different place, and the values, America is a country that we assimilate, become Americans,
Mhm.
learn to speak English. All
Mhm.
of that has been lost shockingly, in the blue states. There is zero incentive for people to migrate to this country for search of a better life, which I don't fault the people who want to come to America, because it is the land of opportunity. It is the greatest country on earth. That being said, because of political decisions in Washington, D.C., largely made by Democrats, the
No.
incentive to encourage people to become Americans and embrace American culture, which happened in every other phase of immigration in this country, has been
That
completely
was also
lost.
Reagan's position.
Well, you know what? Ronald Reagan was president 50 years ago.
But the values are the same, are not? The
Okay,
values
so
we
let me
had
ask you,
since the very moment,
you've
since the
referred
very
to
first time
American
of the founding
values. What
fathers.
what American values are you talking about?
The value of having of being judged on the content of your character, the values of having a chance
Okay,
of
well, that's Martin Luther King who said that.
well,
So,
it was you can say it in other words, or even in the case of Lincoln, and it was the case incarnated, if not in the words of Alexander Hamilton, who was born out of wedlock and was as poor as a rat when he came. He would have come here illegally. So
well,
the idea is,
all of them came here, quote unquote.
what does it matter? The system that abhor the idea of nobility, or ranks of nobility, the American Revolution, or the idea is that you should not have any chance at improvement in your life as an
Look,
immigrant.
again, America is not a country that has no borders and we open our doors to everyone. We're now at a place, we're now at a place in the world where, I mean, look, I feel horribly for these people that come from foreign countries that don't have the opportunity that we have in America. But it is not America's job to take everybody. Again,
Mm.
we need some rationality here, and I don't buy that you're here illegal, we'll give you 5 more years to prove yourself. I'm not buying it. We need to get to a point where we know who's in this country. If you're
Mm.
here illegally, again, you don't get to prove yourself. You've already proven yourself. You came here illegally. You need to go
How do
back
you
home and come in correctly.
how do you come legally?
Well, again, we've had this conversation, and
Yes.
I think that but I think that you want to start changing the system. Maybe
Mhm.
you change that system, and instead of having different quotas from different countries,
No,
which we,
I abhor the idea of quotas. Eh?
but
I
again,
believe in individual character.
I
Uh,
think that that is that well, it depends on who's assessing the character. If it's some bureaucrat in Washington, D.C., I have zero faith in that because
I agree. So it should be based on commitment because the commitments you have to provide. So you have to take a test. You have to make some number of hours of
you should
volunteering.
have to learn English.
You
You
should.
should have to take a test. You should not be eligible for any federal government or state government benefits for a period of 5 years. We don't need people to come in and mooch off the government. We need people who are self-sustaining, who can come in and who can work.
The,
We don't need
even even
and
on
who
that
can support
I could
families.
even on that I could negotiate despite the Cuban experience because the Cubans were treated even with loans so they could with some safety networks so were not afraid of being an entrepreneur because if you have no safety networks and you fail in your entrepreneurial endeavor your family hits the floor. But and look what happens to Florida. So, but even on that, I would be able to make compromises.
Again, I'm telling you, I think that the way to a compromise is to figure out the legal immigration system.
How
Well,
my question? Repeat. Let me repeat my question. How do you come legally?
well, again, we've had that conversation, and as I said,
Yes.
I'm not a
Mhm.
you were explaining. You do a much better job of explaining it than I
Mhm.
do. So,
It depends basically on your sponsor. So it doesn't depend. The immigrant is going to be you who is going to live probably the rest of your life here. And yet, what we are judging is the quality of your sponsor, whether he makes $50,000 or more per year, things like that. So if the system is so twisted when we compare it with American values, should at
yeah,
least
but
this
you seem to equate American values with open doors, come all, come one,
no
come all. That's not.
no I am comparing it to the life experience of Alexander Hamilton. I am comparing it to the words of the preached by Ronald Reagan. And should at least these people should at least not have a chance of one opportunity to test themselves. If they
They
fail that
had that
opportunity,
chance. They came to this country illegally. They broke the
well, they
law.
no,
They
they didn't
broke the
they didn't
law.
because to not break the law, those people should not have come in the
They
first place
broke the,
because they didn't have the right sponsors. How could you prove yourself here
then
if
changed,
you don't here?
then changed legal immigration. They broke, if your first act in the country that you want to live in is to break its law, I would argue you're off to a bad start.
And just very briefly, so far as and you I believe we're in agreement on that too because you said that the number of immigrants should not be set arbitrarily with quotas per country, and I agree. I mean it should be the number should be set by independent created indicator, probably by the Department of Labor, saying how many immigrants do we need. That should be the indicator. But
Okay. I mean that might work, but again, yeah, I think that my position though
Mhm.
is we should allow people to come into this country based on what this country needs. And whether that's the Department of Labor projecting forward by a year or a couple of years, there has to be a more analytical and scientific way of doing it than right now. That if you live in a preferred country, or or your continent is favored over another continent,
Mhm.
that you're allowed to emigrate. I think that there's some common ground as well. But
JFK,
I
no
do
accidents of birth.
I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. I find it interesting that the progressive position is, rather than saying what they support, they always say that, and not always. I try to avoid always and never.
Mhm.
Their usual first response is, "Tell me where you're going to give me something. Where are you going to compromise?" Yet they rarely come out first and say, "Here's what I'm willing to give on." And look, right now, and you and I both know that I think that there's no surprise that when Barack Obama controlled both houses of Congress and the presidency,
Mhm.
when Joe Biden did, and when Donald Trump did twice, that neither of the three did
Mhm.
immigration reform.
No, I completely
I
agree.
think I mean, that will tell you alone that, one is that both sides are raising a inordinate amount of money on the system, and they're raising it from basically the people that are 90% supporters of their views on everything.
Not
And
necessarily because immigration is not an issue that is determinant of the vote. It's a secondary issue. But I agree. So if the Democratic Party so far, the position of the Democratic Party oscillates, and Biden is the best example of that. Between the abolitionists left that only wants you to make concessions, but they want to make none, or Biden when he is oppressed by the polls, that he goes and ends up deporting more people than Trump has deported so far.
yeah, well, I mean, I'll give you an example of a
Mm,
Republican. So James
mhm,
Lankford, Republican senator from Oklahoma.
mhm.
He was involved in negotiations with Democrats, and his quote unquote solution that he thought sounded good until people started figuring out was to allow, what was it, like between 2,500 and 5,000 illegal immigrants each month to come into this country. And people started figuring that out and said, that's not a solution. And it quickly went away. I mean, look, right now, you say that immigration isn't determinative of the vote. I
Mhm.
would argue that in 2024, it absolutely was, because it was one plank that the Republicans used effectively to
It
highlight
was
the
for the
well, but for even middle of the road Americans, it highlighted the Democratic Party's cultural radicalism, that they would let people into this country unvaccinated with no security background check, that arguably were a threat to terrorists. We were terrorists coming into this country, and we have documented proof that that was indeed the case. It was one example of cultural radicalism on the Democrats. And that's not me as a Republican saying it. That's a book written by two Democrats who highlight the Democrats' cultural radicalism.
I follow more mainstream sources like Pew Research and the Cato Institute, the works made by the Cato Institute, which are doing the best work on immigration at the center and at the right. Um, I'd say that the point is, I'm not talking about immigration was not the first issue, unless you are talking about the MAGA base, but it was
It
the
was the
second.
sec. It was the second issue.
Yeah, it was the second, and a very important second. So even for Latinos. So I agree. And you say the far left is that this has dominated cultural issues in the Democratic Party as not going to make you concessions. I agree. And that's precisely why working not on the side of policy, but because in the side of policy you may get beautiful bills like the Kennedy McCain, and those bills are going to go nowhere. Starting from on the field of politics, of creating visibility on alternatives, don't you believe we should start working on something that is different from what we have had and has led nowhere? Because not even you say, I would like to have an immigration system that brings people depending on their skills, and but you are not going to get that. We want to get more control about the flows of immigration so we don't get criminals. But you are not going to get that unless you are willing to create visibility to a position of the center that politically corners both extremes and gain enough visibility so in 2029 politicians don't evade it, don't pretend it doesn't exist. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack in what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than a simple yes or no answer, I will say that in politics, it's you have to be able to convince your side that there is an advantage to doing something or to not doing something. And the challenge that speak directly about Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge that Republican candidates face is unless we can specifically demonstrate an advantage to providing some sort of immigration compromise, there's no incentive for them to change their position. So, and no one, look, politicians will talk all about what they stand for and what they don't stand for. The ultimate thing that motivates all politicians, and it is a universal truth, is getting reelected. And right now, I don't know what the secret sauce is from an immigration perspective to highlight that compromise. But maybe instead of a 1,000-page immigration mega bill,
Mm-hmm.
maybe they look at solving small problems to build momentum towards solving a bigger problem. You
Yeah, but
know,
that's a non-starter. That's a non-starter because every time the Republicans say that, they say, well, let's start with enforcement, and someday later on we'll talk about your concession.
well,
So
we tried it
from
your
now, give
way
me
with the
100% of what I want.
We tried it
We,
your way in 1986, and the enforcement never happened, but the amnesty did. So maybe we start from
so,
the other side of the equation.
but that's a non-starter either. You
Well,
will
by
never,
because the left won't compromise. Maybe
well,
the left needs to compromise.
Well, but you also know that you have just said that in the left, culturally they are dominated by the far left and the wokeism and the bolshevik side. So my proposal is to start giving visibility to alternatives. So in 2028, politicians don't pretend those alternatives don't exist and that they
Oh,
only
they exist. They're just not politically palatable. So again, I think that
No, if you ask the average voter, the average voter only knows one thing, two things: is the childishness of apologize or the cruelty of Trump's immigration policies. As is, there were no ground in the middle because actually there is no visibility on any ideas on the middle.
you're well, yeah, you're right. I think that that is the case. And look, I still believe that the problem that Congress has right now, and that American faith in government's ability to solve big problems is abysmal, and in part because government has failed in solving big problems.
Mm-hmm.
They pass these massive bills that nobody knows what's in them, and people on depending upon who authors the bill, they're told to just vote for it because it's helpful to XYZ political party. Obamacare being one example, the Inflation Reduction Act being another example. But again, we need to get back to, and you won't like it, small bite-sized bills that people, I mean, I think that you start making, you nip around the edges and make progress, and maybe legal immigration is the place to start. And then at that point, you can say, okay, let's take on the big monster of illegal immigration. And then that point, you've established something that actually works and both sides agree is a success.
Yeah, but you are saying first, let's start with what we both agree, enforcement, and that way you give
No,
me
no, 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 I'm not.
100% of.
No, I apologize that I'm not explaining it accurately. That maybe we look to reform the legal immigration system
Hmm,
to make it more along the lines of what you're talking about.
okay,
That
yeah,
we establish,
fair.
that character becomes the quality of what's inside is more important than the color of your skin or where you came from. That we get, I think that's where we change the factors that allow people to legally come to this country. And
Mhm.
then when people say, hey, you know what, this is really working, maybe we have something here, then you give the people in the middle the courage to step up and say, we can solve the illegal immigration problem and let's have that conversation because no politician wants to walk the plank.
Oh, and I agree. So in those terms, I agree. Which if that's what it takes, if start working on how our immigration system should look to honor founding fathers like Alexander Hamilton, to rescue values like those preached by Lincoln and Reagan, I agree. And then we could have the conversation about illegal immigrants later,
I, look,
and about enforcement later, because
I agree with you, but I think that
so
demonstrate that something can work, and then the odds are that the American public will demand change be made. Because right now, they're not demanding that change be made.
well, they are not demanding that change be made because they don't know how change looks like. So that's where I found my hopes when I started working in this conversation with you, in you helping me bring visibility about a system of immigration, legal immigration, if you want, that honors those values, because only if it has enough visibility, and that takes time in politics, if only if it has enough visibility, people, politicians on both extremes are not going to be able to pretend that that alternative doesn't exist.
I would wholeheartedly agree with you that the extremes dominate most public policy debates,
Mm.
immigration being one, but healthcare, government spending, taxes. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that's the way the system is set up. We have a two-party system in this country, and the gerrymandering that goes on right now by both parties has created districts where there's no incentive to move toward the middle, and that the extremes get all the publicity, and we have legislators that are more interested in reading their press clippings than they are on actually getting things done.
I know, I agree completely, but that's precisely a reason why in different ideas, new ideas have to be given a chance to get enough visibility. Otherwise, as I say again, the closer you get to the elections, to the primaries especially, the closer the incentive is to pretend that those alternatives don't exist. That involve politicians start pandering either to abolish ICE or to core MAGA.
No, you're right. I mean, again, the number one incentive for every politician is to get reelected, because if you don't get reelected, you can't implement the change you want to see.
Mhm.
And the challenge is in many states that, Republicans run to the right, Democrats run to the left, and it used to be that you run to the middle in the general election. Except now, you run close enough to the middle to capture some swing voters, but not so far to the middle that you alienate your base. And that's just how politics is run.
And yet, after the primaries, politicians have to run to the middle because of that huge mass that is not impressed by either abolish eyes or core MAGA.
Well, yeah,
And
but they run close enough to the middle so that they can attract them, but not so close that they don't lose their or alienate their
the problem
base.
is how that middle looks like, because that middle pretty much doesn't exist. For instance, in the case of immigration, before you sell the solution, you have to sell the problem. Only by giving visibility to alternatives, at the moment those politicians get closer to the middle to try to captivate all the mass that is in the middle, is that those new ideas may have a chance, but only if they are visible. Otherwise, it's easier for those politicians to pretend those alternatives don't exist.
Well, right now, the American public largely sees that the humanitarian mess that happened at the border under Joe Biden is not happening anymore. So they're realizing that strong enforcement can tangibly make a difference in their lives. And in spite of what we've seen in Los Angeles with the largely peaceful protests, and I should say that in air quotes, there was significant and millions of dollars damage done to the city, not by people who were intent on protesting, but by, again, by the far left who were intent on wreaking havoc and causing damage. So that hurts the cause more
I
of
agree. I
so
agree.
and that's the problem right now is that the middle of America sees that and go, they see people waving flags of foreign countries that they want to stay and they say they want to stay in America. That's not the right image. I mean, your side, I won't say your side.
And no,
That's
it's
not
not on my side.
I won't that's why I apologize.
Mm,
That the people on the far left need
mm.
a radical image rebalancing. Waving the flags of foreign countries on top of burning cars in American cities does not say to people, let's open up our country to them to be generous.
Yeah, so that's precisely why I want to renew my invitation to continue this conversation with some other people you may want to invite to join us, because we need to create that middle that precisely isolates the far left and the far
Let's
right.
do it. I'm all for it. And I'm happy to
And
continue this conversation.
having said that, I want to give you the last word because we have only 2 minutes more.
No,
So,
I'll be quick. Look, and I think that
mhm,
I think what you've seen over the course of the last 25, 30 minutes is you and I don't agree on what the solution is. I think, though, I hope that what the people that are watching this see is that it is possible to have a rational conversation about a hot political topic without devolving into insults and finger pointing and name calling. And I think that we need more, the more that gets attention gets resolved. The more we are able to
mhm,
talk about this
mhm.
civilly without going into our corners, that's how things get solved in this country, and we've lost track of that. So thank you. I'm glad you asked me to do this. I think that we need more of these types of conversations, of thoughtful dialogue. I hope that you feel the same way, and I
Yes,
hope that you didn't feel like I was attacking you. I don't think that I did,
no.
but I appreciate you for at least inviting me to have this important conversation with you.
And you have my contact information, so we can have a second part of this with another more people, because we need to bring more visibility and alternative that is different from the cruelty of the Ormaga and the childishness and stupidity of the far left. Having said that, thank you again, and this should hopefully this is the start of a new trend on immigration that has more future, and that honors our founding fathers, who there's definitely at least to have an immigration system that doesn't ban Alexander Hamilton.
Thank you
Okay.
again.
Mhm.